It's really sad.
Yeah, well, so there's a conspiratorial frame of mind here, which is given just enough Pavlovian reinforcement to be almost impossible for people to break out of, because there are occasional conspiracies. There are certainly bad incentives that can be detected where it's easy to allege a profit motive on the part of Pfizer. I mean, so you referenced the fact that Pfizer was prematurely recommending booster shots, right? Well, the reason for that is, the cynical reason for that is fairly obvious to
Mm-hmm.
see, because this would mean literally billions of dollars falling to their bottom line if that were our health policy. And so there's this background concern about a profit motive in medicine that is deranging people's thinking here. And I mean, so Brett Weinstein is an example of this. I mean, I know that he's very concerned that the emergency use authorization for these vaccines required that there be no valid therapeutic for COVID in order to get triggered. And so,
I'm quickly going to go to the bathroom on the other side of the house and get rid of some of this blood in my stomach. It's starting to make me feel real sick. So just watch it and enjoy, and I'll be back as soon as I can. Thank you.
by definition, this is on his account, by definition, it had to be judged that there was nothing in the armamentarium of medical science that could treat COVID in principle in order to fast track these vaccines, and therefore we overlooked the near panacea of ivermectin, an old compound that is generically available and from which no pharmaceutical company stands a chance of profiting. And so there, in Brett's mind, you have the perfect storm of bad incentives and greedy pharmaceutical executives driving policy toward windfall profits and disregarding the life-saving opportunity of handing out ivermectin to one and all, and driving us toward some kind of abyss of novel risk, right? Because on his account, these mRNA vaccines are new and therefore have to be assumed to be dangerous because they by definition are untested, or we're testing them on ourselves now on his account. So this is where we have to deal with the claim about ivermectin and why it's not a rational alternative to these vaccines.
Yeah, well, I do want to go over this because the notion about the emergency use authorization is incorrect. Firstly, that is the definition in the setting of a pandemic or a crisis for the FDA is may be effective. That's all it takes. May be effective. It doesn't have to be that there's no other treatment. Okay, as long as something may be effective in an emergency situation, the FDA has the ability to push forward, as they did. You may recall, they gave an EUA for hydroxychloroquine. They gave an EUA for convalescent plasma. There already was other things, like, for example, when the convalescent plasma was granted, which was wrong and had to be withdrawn, as was a hydroxychloroquine, both of those there were other things out there for treatment. That is,
Right.
when the plasma, there were already, so, we've been through this where there were all sorts of sense, whether it was then president or other people following the president, that hydroxychloroquine was, some magical drug, and it proved not only to not have an effect, but to also have some dangers. The convalescent plasma, where over 600,000 Americans got convalescent plasma because of a tortured data analysis without a randomized trial. That was given an emergency use authorization, which promoted hundreds of thousands to get the treatment, and may have actually helped to spur on these variants because they were getting these polyclonal, antibodies that certainly wasn't helping the situation, helping them. So, then comes ivermectin. Now, I've reviewed that data carefully because, on Twitter, if I put anything on Twitter, I usually get at least some comments about did they get ivermectin? Or if only they had ivermectin. If they all had ivermectin, no one needs a vaccine. This kind of stuff, right? I said, where did this come from? So it turns out, there are a bunch of small studies, right? And they've been meta-analyzed multiple times by different parties. And, I think the best raking over of the data was by this fellow Gideon Meyerowitz-Katz, who put together is ivermectin for COVID-19 based on fraudulent research. And that was just, earlier this month on a Medium. Now, in it, he takes an unbiased view and very careful view of ivermectin, which is an anti-parasitic medicine, as you mentioned. It has been used for river blindness. It is used for lice. It is used for various parasitic diseases. And it's relatively safe. I mean, there are some serious side effects, but they're uncommon. Now, the point here is that what about these trials? Do we have any large trials? The trials like, I did one of the largest clinical trials in medicine with 41,000 patients in 18 countries around the world for heart attack. And, I know what a large trial is when I see it. Mega trials, over 10,000, which is what you want and what the UK has done in the recovery trials. We haven't had one large trial in the whole COVID-19 pandemic done in the United States. But these trials of ivermectin are exceptionally small. And the largest one was this one from Egypt, which Gideon Meyerowitz-Katz shows was highly irregular. 1/3 of the people who died from COVID in the trial were already dead when the researchers started to recruit them. I mean, you just don't see this kind of stuff.
You need a time machine to run that trial.
You have, quote, if this is an outright fraud, the ethical concerns of randomizing people into a clinical trial before the ethical approval comes through is enormous. And, his piece, takes this hard in terms of the fact that this trial from Egypt, the largest, which isn't large at all. I mean, this, few hundred people in either arm of ivermectin. This is not what you would call any evidence for making ivermectin a standard drug. Now, I see a signal there that ivermectin could be beneficial. I don't know why. I don't know the mechanism. And I would also hasten to add that, our place and many others have raked through every drug known to mankind for repurposing. That is, most molecules, drugs, have been characterized. We know their structure, and we can match up whether it would work against this virus. And ivermectin has never shown up, despite hundreds of others that have, for having an antiviral specific qualities. But putting the biology aside, it looks like there's a signal. But for anyone to say that this should be given universally, and as Brett Weinstein has said, and others, that it's 99% effective, there is no drug that's 99% effective known to man. And then to say it reduces mortality or improves survival by 70, 80, 90%, these are impossible. They have never occurred. This is, just not acceptable.
Yeah, well, so what's conspicuous here is what I am not saying in Brett's defense. I mean, Brett is somebody who I consider a friend. He's definitely a colleague. He's moderated some of my debates. I know his brother, Eric, very well. He's a fellow podcaster. We've been on each other's podcasts. I guess I would say that I haven't heard everything he has said on this topic, and he's gone on for many, many hours, I know, but I've heard enough to be very uncomfortable with what he has put out there, and I do consider it dangerous, what strikes me as just frank misinformation getting pushed out there to millions and millions of people. But it is, in Brett's case, born of almost a characterological bias against institutions at this point, some of which I do understand. I mean, so, like, for instance, one thing that's really animating him is the response to what he's doing from the big tech companies, right? So the fact that YouTube will demonetize the episodes of his podcast where he discusses ivermectin. I'm torn even here. I don't know what YouTube and Facebook and all of these companies should be doing. I mean, there's certainly a straightforward argument that they should be censoring what is obviously misinformation. But
Okay, I don't know that much about ivermectin. Although Eric Topol is saying he found a signal in there, that meaning he found some benefit from ivermectin. But at first he started talking about it being ridiculous to use ivermectin because only 2,000 people were in the trials. Well, I don't know if he knows this or not, but I think there are only 4 genomes that didn't match that were used to set this whole thing off. Dr. Fan Wu used one patient, a 41-year-old Chinese man from the Huanan seafood wet market. One patient now. And he could have tested 10, but he only tested 1. He took the bronchoalveolar lavage fluid and said that he sequenced it, but the way he did it, the methodology was fraudulent. I can prove that very easily, using physics actually. And so that was worthless. And then a Wuhan resident went to Australia and was intercepted by the Doherty Institute, I think it's called, in Australia. And they claimed that he had COVID-19. And of course, this was before any sequence was determined for COVID-19. So what did they use as the primer in their PCR test to make the diagnosis? I mean, it's so self-contradictory, it's unbelievable. They claim to have made their own primer, synthesized their own primer to put in the PCR test to prove that that guy had COVID-19 when nobody knew what the sequence of it was yet. I mean, it's so ridiculous, it's unbelievable. I don't know how they could think that they could diagnose something without having an actual primer that was made from the sequence. I tell you, these people got away with murder. And then 3 people up in Korea were analyzed for the COVID-19 diagnosis and sequence, and they reduced that down to 1 person, maybe because they couldn't get the other 2 to fall in line, but whatever it was, they claimed to have sequenced 1 person. And then the Dr. Zhu article, which is the one that the New England Journal of Medicine published without peer reviewing it, came up with a sequence for 1 person, and it was totally fraudulently done. So we only had 4 people upon which, the gene sequences of 4 people, upon which this entire pandemic fraud was based. And to show you how fraudulent it is, there's a German virologist named Christian Drosten. And I don't know if you know this, but the primer that he used to diagnose people with COVID-19, and even it was done in the United States too, was a piece of the genetic sequence from the original SARS, the one that appeared in 2003. It wasn't even from something they thought was SARS-CoV-2. They took a primer sequence from SARS and they took a piece of the genome of SARS and used it as the primer to diagnose someone with SARS-CoV-2. I mean, it's laughable almost that the whole world could have stopped. I don't know how many trillions of dollars, I guess about 20 trillion was wasted on this entire charade. The United States was even part of it when they said they had diagnosed someone with COVID-19. They didn't have the proper primer either. I mean, golly, this whole thing was an enormous false fabrication or just fabrication that needs to be looked into very, very critically, and the people that did this need to be brought to justice. But on the basis of 4 people, all of whom had a genome that was fraudulently arrived at, this entire fake pandemic was created. There was never any SARS-2 virus. And I prove it in my book.